Christ is risen. How's it going? How you been?
I'm okay, man. We're just keeping the faith out here. Just doing our best. We're all just doing our best.
Because things are reopening, right? Arizona is kind of doing its thing.
It's a hot spot right now, literally and figuratively. Yeah, it's a place where things are going down. People are going out. People seem to have forgotten that people get sick, and they don't care no more. They're like out there without masks, and they're licking each other's faces, and they don't care.
Well, that ain't right.
It's a standard Arizona greeting. You shouldn't judge it, Steve.
Is it really?
Cultural. Like you can't, if it's a cultural thing, you can't judge it.
I have visited before and have had my face licked in Arizona, so I guess that makes sense in retrospect.
There you go. There you go.
Have you been back to church?
I have been back to church.
How's that?
It was interesting, because what we've done is just opened up for like small groups of people. You kind of have to like sign up for it. And I've been back actually a couple times. So like we did a weekday service and we did a Sunday and, wore masks. And then we baptized our goddaughter this last Saturday. So that was reason to be there as well. It's just an interesting like time.
Yes.
To have to like navigate different things and just kind of doing whatever I think helps like settle your internal system a little bit to like re-engage in life. Like, at our therapy practice, we're definitely being encouraged to like get back into the office now and stop doing things via telehealth video. And, obviously it's not like they're forcing us to do that. Like you have to come in now, but it's certainly what's being pushed, like certainly what's being encouraged. And so just having to navigate, like, what's it going to be like to sit in a small room with people and be breathing the same air as them for an hour at a time. And then other people come in and like, it just, it's hard to know exactly what the right way to do all of that is. And I know like some of my clients, like I know their ins and outs of their lives. Right. So I know like they're not social distancing whatsoever and haven't been from the beginning. And so like, it's just hard to know like what my responsibility is as a clinician to my other clients who are trying to do like who would want to come in because they've been social distancing, and like I have other clients who probably would want to come in, haven't been social distancing at all, and like how do I schedule those people together?
Because the therapy experience is different, like remotely versus one-on-one. I mean, there's different social cues, right? Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just a hard, weird thing to have to navigate. Is to like, are there some people that I say like, yeah, let's, you come back in, and is it my responsibility to like protect my clients from getting sick? Like, I just really don't know. Like, I really don't know exactly what is, because they're adults and they can make their own decisions, but like, decisions are often made with like knowing what you're deciding upon, and like you don't know who's coming in before you. Like you can't make a good decision. Only I can really kind of have the information on that.
Yeah.
So it's weird. It's a really weird thing to navigate.
Sure. Yeah. I'm getting that because we're not there yet here in New York, but just kind of like chatting with friends in other places. I mean, the thing that we're sort of seeing here in New York is, kind of like you, the church services are beginning to expand. Mm-hmm. And there are some directives that have come down about like how that's going to happen, the sort of, sign up system, right, for communion and so forth. And now there are all these conversations about like how to receive communion, which is making a lot of people grumpy, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's just kind of all these feelings about like one of the ideas on the table is to do the sort of wash the spoon or have multiple spoons. Have you heard that?
Yeah, like the bamboo spoon kind of thing.
So I think it's different practices in different places. Like sometimes people are suggesting maybe a disposable spoon. In some cases, like maybe multiple metal spoons if a parish has them to sort of to wash them or dip them in like alcohol in between to sort of sanitize them.
Like vodka. Yes. That seems like an Orthodox thing to do.
A thing that I learned in college: the mixture of red wine and vodka is a Stalin. That is a kind of mixed drink.
That checks out.
That is a kind of mixed drink.
And I feel like if you did that though, if you dipped it in vodka afterwards, you'd have to be like Nostrovia, and like that's just what you have to say.
Stalin
And then
was
everyone says truly Nostrovia.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
It's
can see
weird.
that
It's
would
just,
put people in a weird place. Yeah.
yeah, and this is where, I mean, this is why we did those last couple of Be the Bee episodes, because I feel like there's a lot of deeply held emotions and like fear and anger, and like I know definitely online there's like a lot of people who are talking about and arguing about like the whole communion thing, and I don't know. Personally, I'm not too worked up by it. I mean, maybe I have to think about it more, but my sense is, like we talked about in the latest Be the Bee episode, you know, you don't want to push people over the edge in terms of their emotions, right? And there's going to be people who are afraid to come back to church, and maybe this is like one of the practices that makes it a little bit easier for them. You know, it's not like a theological statement. At least that's not how I see it. It's like a ministerial statement, you know, like in the last episode that we did together, it's like, you know, if you feel uncomfortable kissing an icon, like maybe you don't kiss an icon, maybe you just bow to it, right? And that's
Right.
what you can do under the circumstances. Like if you're afraid to receive communion, like maybe it's a good thing if the church is doing a different kind of spoon thing for the time being. You know, would I rather, I don't know.
I think the hard thing is, right, like that, you know, I had said this in Wandering the Desert, and we said it in Be the Bee, like just feel, and I think we even said it on this, like just like the shame I think that comes out for maybe even feeling afraid, you know, like that, oh, does this mean that I'm not a person of faith? Like if I somehow need to like take these concessions for myself or whatever to kind of bravely enough show up. And I just really don't think that, like, I think the trouble is when we become kind of like paralyzed in that, right? Like if we decide I'm never going to take communion ever again, like probably not the right approach to it.
Yeah.
But if it's like, in order for me to even consider taking communion ever again, I need to just get my butt inside of the building with a mask, 6 feet away from people, not touching anything. Like that's just the first step that I need to take, right?
Yeah.
Of like to build kind of this like resilience and to build courage. And even today, like, you know, my wife and I, like, we try to listen to Father Alexis Corey's, like,
oh yeah, the daily readings,
Orthodox
right?
Scriptures. Yeah. It's so fun to hear him. And like every at the end of it, I'm like, I've met him before.
Yeah, he was our host in Louisville back in the day.
I know.
For a beach read.
The best.
Remember beach reads?
What are that? What's that? But today we were, because we haven't been doing it like according to the dates. We've just been trying to go right through the Bible because we started like in May, so this month. So we're just trying to kind of keep up with. Today was like January 23rd on our count of doing this, for example. So we're January 23rd, 2019.
Time is a
really
weird
funny.
Thing. Time is a weird thing under coronavirus.
It's funny because he's always like, today we celebrate the da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, or the Ascension, depending on, you know, it's fine. But he was saying that, because the reading today was when Peter walks on water, and like he talks about another time when they're all on a boat and Jesus is with them. And so Jesus is with them on the boat. He's sleeping. He wakes up, calms the storm.
Yeah.
And they're all like, wow. And then later what happens is this story where Jesus tells the disciple, or like tells Peter to come out to him on the water during the storm. And so there's kind of this like progression in terms of courage that Father Alexis says, like, Jesus is trying to kind of build in them.
Yeah.
You know, that like first he's on the boat with them. He calms the storm to show his power over it. And then during the storm, he's like, you can still walk to me and everything's going to be fine. So it's really cool that there's this kind of like educating, forming way that the Lord approaches his disciples, right? To like increase in them their faith, to increase in them their courage. He's not like, all right, Peter, like throwing you out of the boat now. Like there isn't any of that with him. He just kind of gradually and mercifully leads him to take those first steps.
Yeah.
These are your first steps.
And we're back.
Right?
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. 'Cause again, I think there's a difference between the theological and the pastoral. You know, and sometimes the pastoral is about making things not palatable, right? Making them chewable or digestible. Like it's like Paul talks about this. Like you give a baby milk, not meat. The baby's gonna choke on meat.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a fair point. Like had Jesus right from the get-go, in the middle of this raging storm, been like, "Hey Peter, come out on this non-solid thing. I got you."
Yeah. Yeah.
Wouldn't have worked.
Like, I can't though.
Yeah. I'm scared.
I'm very, very scared.
And that's when Jesus takes a knee, put his arms around him. You get that like classic 1980s sitcom dad moment.
Mm-hmm. He's just like, sack up.
Empathy, the more you know.
Everybody's a winner.
Oh my goodness.
I like the idea of non-empathic Jesus.
Just man up.
Like, don't be a girl.
Dun 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 dun. They're just little NBC PSAs.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think it's important. Yeah, that's why we did those Be the Beebs episodes. You're talking about this on Wandering the Desert, still going. Pop culture still going. But we are approaching
church, by the way?
No.
No.
Last time I was physically in a church building was March 15th.
And I intend to keep it that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain category of grumpy online Orthodox who complain about what we do, and it's like, you're watering down the faith. You guys are all Protestants, yada yada yada. So
us?
Yes. Oh, totally. Yes. This is the other fun thing I've been dealing with over the course of like forever, but also in the last couple of weeks in particular, which relates to this, right? Like as if somehow like using the English language and like using media to explain things in a, like was Jesus watering down the kingdom when he used parables? Was Basil watering down the faith when he like knew philosophy? I mean, whatever. I'm gonna get a little grumpy just thinking about this.
Was Joseph Smith watering down the faith when he found those golden tablets?
Which you can't see.
Yeah. They're mine.
They're in this hat.
You'd have to trust me. You have to trust me. Just trust me.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, that's neither here nor there. That just kind of like, that's an emotion that bubbled up right now, an emotion of frustration. Yeah. I don't feel them either.
Close cousin of the emotion anger.
But we are approaching our summer hiatus that we take every year. Because if you think about it, we've been doing a lot. We've got 2-3 podcasts going a week. Be the Bee videos like this as a video, 3 Men and a Bible as a video, the silence workshops. We just had a lot of stuff going on. So I think people need a break and we need a break to just kind of like read and think. I mean, like do a little bit of input because we've been doing so much output. So I think the week of June 15th is going to be our last probably like media week until mid-August. I think we'll come back around the time of the Dormition. So we will take a break. I know young people are going to sort of be doing summer camp programs and vacation Bible schools. And we've got some other projects we need to work on as well. But if nothing else, I look forward to like reading a book. I think that'll be nice.
Yes. I think that would be good.
Yeah. What else? Anything else to talk about follow-up wise, or should we get into the feelings?
Let us feel the feels.
All the feels.
All of them. Not just some of them.
No, all of them. All 5 of them.
There are only 5.
So what are we doing this week, Christian?
We are discussing, and I can't believe we didn't do this when it came out. Like, why did we not? Were we doing this then? Was Pop Culture Coffee Hour a thing?
Pop Culture Coffee Hour has been a thing for like 4 years.
But when did this come out?
Not 4 years ago.
2015.
Oh, 5 years ago. Maybe not.
So
I was correct. Not 4 years ago.
So this came out right after I started at the GOA.
We had not started Pop Culture yet. Wow. I thought this was a newer movie than that.
Wow. Oh, wow. Have you seen, so we're back to Star Wars again, the lightsaber fights where they take away the lightsaber noises and replace it with
Owen Wilson wows.
Wow.
Yes.
So good. Yeah, that's the homework for next Pop Culture Coffee Hours. We're going to do an entire episode on that. But yeah, this Pixar movie is one of my favorites, but I'll let you go ahead and just give us a summary on it, Steve-O.
Well, my
Did I say
pleasure.
what we're doing? We're doing Inside Out.
Talk about this thing that I've yet to mention.
And the name of the thing, which I'm about to mention, is what I'm about to say.
You heard? So since this is a 5-year-old movie, this is not terribly new, but also not terribly old. I think we're probably still within the spoiler statute of limitations. So I think, potentially, possibly, this is the sort of thing that we should unleash a spoiler porg for in order to... Are you ready? Is it there? You got it?
Necessary.
No, it's 5 years old. It's not that new, but it's not that old.
I guess that's how I would describe Ava, who's also 5 years old.
That's crazy to me that she's 5 years old.
Oh, Ava G.
I didn't know this movie was 5 years old. I'm surprised that your daughter is 5 years old. But anyway, I'm going to keep filling, because radio doesn't work with dead space. I'm just going to keep talking about things and the words that I'm using to fill the space until Christian can get a sound in order to announce the spoiler. There it is. You've been porged. So now we're in spoiler territory. We're going to talk about Inside Out, the 2015 Pixar movie, which is, it's about a baby girl named Riley is born. She opens her eyes at the very beginning. Her parents are sort of leaning over her. And then the camera perspective shifts. And you see from like within the windows of her eyes that there's actually like a control station within her. And there is Joy, who sort of starts this out, but then there are other emotions as well. There's joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust. And they are kind of like in charge of her inner workings. And they manage her memories. They have these core memories that really shape who she is. There's like these islands that are kind of like the key aspects of her personality. There are long-term memory that is, kind of like, it's got that weird sort of cortex-y wiggleness to it, like these kind of shelves with all these memories. Old memories that begin to fade, get thrown away. But I mean, long story short, Riley is kind of well-adjusted. She's got these things within her. Then she moves from Minnesota to San Francisco and her life changes. And there's the kind of like the inner battle as she attempts to readjust to this move and these changes and like her sense of identity. And it's kind of like this inner drama within her, because really the protagonists of the film are joy and sadness and the emotions. And Riley is kind of like, you see these things manifesting in the life of this girl as she's growing up, but it's really kind of like a really interesting look within. Is that a fair synopsis?
Totally. Absolutely.
So what'd you think?
So I love this movie for so many reasons. It's like all of my favorite things smashed together. Like the Pixar movies, of course, like Amy Poehler, who's just always wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And, like stuff with, watching this as a dad, like, it's like, I can't help but kind of like, superimpose my daughters on Riley in some ways. And it's just like, I don't know, man. It's just a beautiful movie. Plus it deals with like so many of the complexities of like human personality and emotion, and obviously draws from like a mode of therapy that I actually use. So there's like kind of some fun stuff like that is going on in this movie that I'm like, oh, especially now, like that I've been practicing for, longer than when I saw this movie last time, right? I've got more years of experience under my belt. I'm like, oh, like that's now, oh, I see what they're doing right here, that I don't know if I noticed that the first time, so it was just really fun to kind of see it. And of course, again, coming at it from the perspective of a parent, like wanting your kids to like have a family island, and seeing Goofball Island, like my kids have definitely like are pretty goofy. So like I felt connected to that in that particular way, which was just, I don't know, it was just cool to kind of have a deeper personal connection to what was going on.
Yeah. That's really sweet. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I super enjoyed this movie too. I didn't watch it until this past weekend, which sometimes when I haven't watched things for pop culture, I will watch them the night before. So I did my homework well in advance this time, which is helpful. Preparation. I enjoyed it. I think like this is such a quintessentially Pixar movie. It is like super creative. I mean, how do they take these like this invisible reality and they represent it using like these physical characters and these physical spaces. I mean, it's really in terms of kind of like making things clear and easy to understand, like we were talking about in the intro before. Like they take something this modality, right, of therapy, and they make it very concrete and very tangible and very real with really compelling characters. I mean, really wonderful performances, a really compelling story, visuals that are great. I mean, the emotion to it as well. There's just kind of like a lot of soul and a lot of heart in this movie, which is fundamentally all about emotions. It's good. I mean, you know, like Pixar rarely disappoints, and this is like even good by Pixar standards. Like this is just a really good this is a really good film.
I know it is. I love it.
And there's a lot. There's a lot. So where do you want to get going?
Well, we could begin just about anywhere, because I guess that, you know, going into the next segment, and my introduction to the next segment as as follows. Here's the next segment.
I heard.
Yeah, I think what's obviously most kind of central to this movie is just the idea of personality, right? Like questions of identity and who Riley is, and they kind of form the background of everything that's going on in this, right? Like the big threat is that her islands of personality are collapsing. Like that is kind of like the ultimate threat of the movie, is that eventually like everything that's about her is going to be lost.
Yeah.
She's maybe kind of numbed out.
Backing up a bit, right? Like, so, you know, the visuals of the movie is that there's kind of this control room behind your eyes that's where your inner stuff runs, and memories are processed on a daily basis, and there are like these 5 core memories, right, that are kind of like the heart and soul of the organism that is Riley. And each of these in the kind of like the infrastructure, the architecture of this world, each of these core memories manifest as kind of like an island, and these are kind of like the fundamental aspects of her personality. So there's like, you know, these really warm memories with her parents, which is like family island. That's part of who she is. This silly memories of her, you know, running around as a toddler with her underpants on her head, right, in the goofball island, and hockey.
Can like confirm that actually happens.
True to life. You know, there's Hockey Island. There's I can't remember. Island. Friendship Island, right? Like her first sort of like real connection with her first best friend. So yeah, these are the things that kind of like shape her and make her who she is. And one of the things that happens is the core memories end up getting displaced, and one by one, like these islands end up sort of falling into the abyss, and she gets kind of more catatonic, right? Her personality begins to fade away.
Yeah. Which is really, I think, a pretty interesting dynamic, right? So and I believe I even mentioned this before on the podcast and sometimes, but like this particular movie is kind of based around a model of therapy called internal family systems, where like those islands of personality and Riley's emotions kind of constitute like these different parts of her, right? Like that are there. She's more than the sum of her parts, right? Like that's the idea, is that while we all have these different parts of us, we're more than the sum of the sum of the parts. That there's a certain kind of agency that we have, because I think it'd be easy to watch that movie and go, oh, like the emotions are running the show, right? Like they're the ones who are at the helm. They're the ones who are doing it. So Riley's almost kind of, it's like the Men in Black. Remember that little alien that lived inside like the giant man suit? And like,
she's a marionette functionally.
It'd be easy to kind of, I think, believe that that's what this movie is saying. But there's a very clear moment where I think that the movie did a very great job of saying like, no, there's more to it than that, because Anger goes and gets an idea to run away at one point.
Yeah.
Right. And he puts it there and waits.
Yes.
And then she accepts the idea. So there's this that's when he goes like, she took it.
Yeah.
Right. Like that is where I think you begin to see, okay, she's more than her parts. Like there's some other kind of like self-leadership that she has here, at least a little bit, right? Where she's not just beholden to like the things that are happening inside of her head. But the idea of like internal family systems, right, is that we have all of these, and I think even on a day-to-day basis, you can experience it, where there's just like these different, almost like sub-personalities that you can almost hear inside of your head. And I don't mean that like in a like dissociative identity kind of way or a multiple personality way, but just like, I really should go work out right now. Ugh, but that sounds so hard. Oh, but I ate all of that, I don't know, ice cream last night, so I probably got some stuff I need to work out. Yeah, but think about how hot it's going to be outside. You know what I mean? There's like these conflicting voices that just come up in our heads. And that's a pretty, like, I think, intuitive way to understand the human person, that we're kind of at war with ourselves. And you even see that happening inside of Riley's head, which I thought was really cool, where like, they all are fighting over the control panel at one point. Like, oh, look at the smell of this thing. I can't believe Dad moved us here. Like, those are two distinct voices, right? Like the disgust with like the smell and the anger that Dad moved us here. And, oh my gosh, are we going to die like that rat? And like, there's just so many like moments where we bounce back and forth between these really distinct parts that are constantly telling us different information, right? And I think the problem becomes for us is when one of those parts becomes extreme to the point where other parts are no longer welcome at the helm. Right? Which is what you begin to see, where everybody sort of thinks that Joy is the boss.
Yeah.
And she's really not. They're all wandering around. They're all kind of, all the emotions are cut loose and they're just kind of doing whatever they do. They hop in at random times, and they're certainly not an organized crew.
Yes. Which you see later in the adults.
Yes.
Right. Which is really wonderful. Like, it becomes like, and at the end of this movie, like when Riley kind of grows up in a sense, right? And she sort of like, she sheds the sort of like the artificial identity of the happy girl, right? Which is being imposed upon her, and the console expands, and like the different aspects of her can actually work together in harmony. Joy and sadness in particular, right? You begin seeing those like half blue, half gold memories, right? There's like this little bit complexity, but that for me is a very fascinating thing. Like the image of like all of these aspects of her together, like discussing things reasonably.
Yeah.
Like anger has something to say about this. You see that in the mind of the mom in particular. Like the mom seems probably the most emotionally put together character that we come across.
Yeah. And what's interesting too there, right, is like, and I didn't notice this the first time, but like, who's in the position of the captain's chair?
For her, it's sadness. Sadness
is in the captain's chair, which I thought was like so interesting.
Yeah.
Because one of the things too that like is almost universally accepted, as far as I know, might even possibly be, and I'm only saying this because I don't know all of the different kinds of theories that deal with like the parts of the human person in this particular way.
You're not omniscient.
I'm not omniscient, but like in all of the ones that I'm familiar with, there's this idea of like a kind of like a sad, wounded, hurt part, right? Like some part of us that carries our pain.
Yeah.
And that part that carries the pain is the part of us that makes it us capable of connecting with other people. Like it's from that pain that we're able to like be joined together and to like empathize and connect and all of that kind of stuff, which is why I love that the mom's sadness was the one, like she's the one who's constantly scanning Riley to like see what's going on, right? Like when there's kind of a little bit of something going on with Riley, sadness is the one who's like, did you guys all see that? Right? Like,
yeah.
Like, what was that? And then she goes, probe about school, right? Yeah. Like, but make it subtle. And like, so how was your first day at school? And like Joy's kind of running the show there, but sadness is calling the shots because sadness is the one that's connected. Like they're able to work, she's able to pull from all of her parts to try to connect with her daughter, who does not have access to joy or sadness in that moment. She's just angry, afraid, and disgusted, right? So that's why anger is like, she's being like, she's probing, and it's like, it's so good because I'm like, dude, I get that part of anger too. Like I've got that part that goes like, stop probing.
Yeah. Leave me alone. Yeah, no, it's beautiful. Yeah. And like, again, the artistic choices that you get, because like in those moments, it's almost like a submarine battle, right? It's like, these people who are manning different instruments, who are scanning and probing and sort of like, getting ready to fire the missiles. Like there's the really wonderful scene where Dad is getting ready to put his foot down. Right. And it's kind of like everything goes into DEFCON 1 and like they take out the keys. Right. And it's like this like nuclear launch codes that are happening. Like the foot is being put down. Right.
Yeah.
but it's really cool. Yeah. One, this kind of like this look into the complexity of the human person. And two, I think it is really interesting that like sadness becomes this means of empathy. I think it's interesting that, the mom, who is again the most like obviously maternal sort of character, the one who's constantly looking, it's like this sadness that makes her aware. And it's something that happens within Riley as well, right? I mean, like Joy by herself, voiced by Amy Poehler, is very I feel like Joy is very Leslie Knope. Joy is very like motivated and like everything is going to be great and we're going to fix this and we're going to have a great day and we're going to have a great week and a great month and a great year and a great life.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just kind of like she gets as Leslie Knope says in one of the episodes, like, sometimes she gets tunnel vision in order to like achieve her goals, and that's totally Joy. Whereas like sadness is the one who actually has this like wider scope of things. And it's interesting because it's very counterintuitive. That for me anyway, like processing this now, having watched the movie, it's counterintuitive, but oh so natural that pain and sadness would be the thing that actually brings us together as human beings. That, because again, there's theology there too. Like this is the point of union between God and man, right? This is the point of union between people. In our lowest points, not our highest points. Like, we empathize when everything's going great, right? We empathize when things are terrible. When Christ joins us, he joins us in the tomb. He joins us on the cross. He doesn't join us like in kingship and stuff like we've talked about before, right? Like, and that I don't know, for me, that was so surprising and so counterintuitive. But now that I think about it, like that, I mean, that's the witness of the gospel, right? I mean, like that's just totally kind of the nature of reality.
Which I think you see so beautifully illustrated when sadness is the one that goes and like actually, like Bing Bong has like lost his rocket. Riley's imaginary friend Bing Bong loses his rocket in which they used to fly to the moon together. And like he's clearly sad. And Joy goes over there and tries to cheer him up. Like, right? But sadness actually goes and sits down at the brink of this chasm of lost, like forgotten memories, and stares out into it with him, alongside of him. And she's like, I'm really sorry you lost your rocket. It's sad.
Yeah.
And like just to like be seen and felt and heard, like Bing Bong cries.
Yeah.
Cries his little candy cries.
Yeah.
And then he's like, I'm all better now.
Try the caramel, like, delicious.
Yeah, try the caramel, it's delicious. But like there's the reality is that like the sadness is where I think we do bond, like where we find some way of like feeling our way into another person's experience, right? Like we can certainly celebrate with people and all of that, but the times I think when we really think about when we felt connected with people probably mostly revolve around how people interacted with us when we were afraid or sad or hurt or something. Like that probably is like, you were really there for me. It's kind of like, how there's something like we know about, like when someone was there for us, we don't mean that they were there for us like for like the fun stuff only.
Yeah.
Like when we say that someone was there for me, we mean they were there for the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Like the difficult things. But what's interesting too, I think, right? Plus I use this movie a lot, by the way, with my clients. I'm like, the movie Inside Out? Like, let's like, it helps to give a little image of like what's going on inside your head. But what really struck me this time too was that none of Riley's emotions or parts is bad. Right? Like they are all doing what they think is going to help her.
Yes.
Like every single one of them. Even like anger thinks he's helping her. Disgust thinks she's saving her life. Like,
yes.
Socially and right.
You're welcome.
Like, don't eat that like gross stuff. Yeah, totally. Fear is absolutely like all only concerned with Riley's safety.
Yeah.
But there becomes this belief there, right, that like that joy somehow has to ultimately be what we get back to. Like that has to be the only thing that really she can feel. Like we manage moments of fear, we manage moments of anger, but joy has to be the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have to, like she's, you stayed our happy girl. Where's my happy girl? Like there's this kind of like, message that Riley gets confirmed from the outside, and we all get this happens to each of us as we grow up, that we get these messages, whether they're overt or covert, it doesn't really matter, but we internalize them to be like, oh, well, this is who I have to be happy in life, or this is who I have to be to somehow have meaning or to get love or whatever. And so the pressure for her is to stay happy. She has to be a happy girl. Yeah. And so in this moment, she begins to feel that there's parts of her that aren't welcome in the world, right? Which is why internally you see that happen with like, okay, Sadness, you stay in this circle.
Yeah. Yes, that's your job. This little circle that's here. Just wider than you.
Don't mess anything up, right? And like you can, again, like you can almost like hear yourself do those kinds of things to yourself, right?
Oh, totally.
Like, don't be afraid. Just don't be scared. Like, just jump off the thing. Just jump. Like, just don't be scared. Don't be scared. Don't like what? Yeah. But that doesn't help you ever.
No.
In fact, what it actually does is create chaos.
Yeah.
It creates pressure internally. And so, like, what happens immediately after? Like, they try to lock Sadness away. I think this process, by the way, takes a lot longer than like 10 minutes, like it did in the movie. Like, it's kind of this, because we can keep our things locked away pretty long, but they can't. They don't go away. Yeah. Right? Like they start acting out. The parts start acting out. And in the movie, you see it happen like, because it's a movie and you got to have a plot that happens, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as Sadness is tried to put in that circle, like what happens?
That's when the core memory becomes Sadness. That's when Joy tries to like save the core memories by ejecting all of them to prevent Sadness from going in there. And of course, that's what leads to Riley becoming catatonic and the whole sort of like trying to get back to replace those core memories.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I can totally identify with that. Like as somebody who is very conflict averse, right? Somebody who like is, again, as a 3 has to sort of project kind of like a good face forward. Like I totally get the idea to sort of like Sadness, not feeling sad right now, feeling good, not feeling angry right now. Everything is at peace, not feeling uncertain right now, feeling confident, right? Like these as negative emotions as sort of bad things that it is shameful to feel. You know, Sadness goes in that box. Whatever goes in that box, and the points to be peppy, confident, everything is fine, everything is wonderful, everything is awesome.
It's just going to keep you from getting things done.
Yeah. Yes.
Because we don't have time to like let everything get all droopy on us, Sadness.
Nope. I got a memo to write.
Yeah.
But it's true. It's like not letting these things just kind of take their course leads to Riley's ultimate destruction. I mean, it's crazy, right? Because she goes to the point whereas she runs away. I mean, she gets to the point where she's incapable of feeling anything.
Yeah.
You know, she becomes a husk
is a
of a
really
human.
Important, I think, kind of thing that you know, again, like seeing it with the eyes of a therapist, like you go like, oh, okay, that's what they're doing here. Like they're not hitting you over the head with it, but they're like showing you some realities that like you can't selectively numb your feelings. Yeah. Right? You can't be like, I'm only going to feel sadness or only going to feel happy. You might be able to do your best to like avoid feeling sad or try to, but only by like, I mean, this is like the plight of the 7, right? Like the 7 was always trying to run away from bad feelings by doing awesome stuff, but they have to keep doing more and more awesome stuff. But it's like, you can't run forever. Yeah. You know, like eventually something is going to happen. Like a parent's going to die, or you're going to get a divorce, or you're going to like whatever. And then like all of a sudden you're going to have to be like, man, I've got some stuff I need to sort through. You know, like life is not all just like, you know, cotton
rad adventures.
Yeah, exactly. Like boat rides and whatever. But that'd be cool if it were. I forget where I was going with that. Oh, so yeah, you can't like selectively numb the feelings, which is why when sadness gets ejected, so does joy. Yeah. Right? Like they both are gone. Like if I'm not going to feel sad, if I'm incapable of feeling the lows, then I'm also incapable of feeling the highs.
Because they're connected.
They're connected. Exactly.
It's like a sine curve. You can't have the top of the curve without the
sin
bottom.
Of the 7, by the way, is gluttony, because they always want more and more. Give me more of the fun. Give me, because it's never enough. Right? Like they never really truly feel happy. Like they are constantly searching for the next thing that's going to like satisfy their desire. Right? Like it's not a real joy. It's not a real abiding sense of like satisfaction and contentment. It's this like frenetic fear that drives them toward highs, right? Like literal or figurative. probably literal, using it highs from shopping, for example, right?
Sure.
But then what you see when the dashboard goes black, and like she goes totally numb.
Yeah.
Because that's just what happens when we start cutting parts of ourself off. We just become non-feeling whatsoever.
And the part of her that's cut off is the part that actually brings her back, because it's sadness at the console at that moment that actually brings her back.
Right.
You know, and it's interesting, right? When she comes to herself finally, when she's there with her parents, like she weeps.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this like stuff that had been dormant and put into a little chalk circle, and it was beginning to just numb itself into non-existence. Like it all comes forth in this moment of sadness. And like, that's where this bond happens with her mom and dad again, like this bond, mm-hmm. But that becomes like joyful too, right? Like that's the interesting thing. Like that moment of sadness becomes the embrace that her parents gave her in that moment.
Because connection is what makes it better, right? Yeah. Like, and sadness ultimately fuels connection. Sadness ultimately fuels our ability to feel our way into one another's experience, which is like all really any of us want at the end of the day, is to feel connected.
Yeah.
To like, because we're made for it. We're made for communion with one another. We're made for love. Yeah. Like that's what it is. And so when things line up like that, like, oh, okay. Like,
because that becomes her new core memory.
Yep.
Right. That becomes the foundation for Family Island Part 2.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's so interesting too. Like this is, you know, I was thinking about this as well. Like we run from sadness, right? We run from these sorts of negative emotions, but probably one of the most famous or sort of well-known bits of scripture is when Jesus feels sadness at the tomb of Lazarus, right? Like, you know, it's like Jesus wept, like this sort of unambiguous moment of sadness there. Like there's something, because something is there. Like you said, emotions are there to tell us something that is true.
Yeah.
Right. Like Jesus stands at the foot of his friend's grave. Like, this is not okay. And he weeps.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we are afraid of weeping. We feel as if weeping is somehow like bad or weak or whatever it is. Like the Lord of all, the Lord of hosts weeps. You know, he feels anger and disgust in the temple when he turns over the tables of the money chambers. Like we see this, we see these emotions.
Right. Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing. Again, I think the issue for us with our emotions is like sometimes we do, and you see it happen, right? Where anger takes over and like grabs the controls and is like, and so that's when those parts of us get extreme and we lose balance, and we're fragmented, right? Like one part is just like, get out of here, everybody else, I'm going to handle this.
Yeah.
And we lose control, right? That there's no sense of like self-leadership there at all. It's just like we become that part. And like that is when kind of things get difficult for us, right? Like if fear were to get totally extreme, right? What fear is there to do, and I love when she explains what they're for, what the emotions are for, right? Fear is here to keep Riley safe. Like that is what fear exists to do. And it's good that we all have fear. Again, even coming back to like going back to church, if you're afraid, like that's okay. Like that means that your body is trying to tell you, be careful. Like that's all that your body's trying to say. The problem for us is when we begin to feel like fear, that our emotion of fear is reality. Right? Like that is the end all be all of this experience. If I feel afraid, the reality is everything truly is unsafe. But that's not exactly what that means. What that means then is just like, well, now what we need to figure out a way to do is to create a sense of safety for ourselves. Right? Like the world is, I mean, COVID-19 sucks, but in some sense, like the world is just as dangerous as it's always been.
Yeah.
Because people get sick and die. Like that is just the reality of human existence. Now we're kind of, it's in our mind and in our awareness in a new and powerful way. And that fear part is kind of getting worked up a lot. So what we need to do is dialogue with the fear and be like, okay, buddy, like what would help us feel a little more safe, right? Like what would create enough safety to go to the store for today? Because I got to go to the store. Otherwise I will die.
Yeah. Yeah. But if I don't die from COVID-19, I'll die from starvation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And those become, I mean, that's really where growth happens, right? I mean, we kind of see this in the life of Riley as well. Like there's a difference between her disorganized emotions, like the emotions of a child versus the emotions of the mom, in particular, who everybody kind of like knows their place, is sitting at the table, is kind of having like a calm discussion, like here's my input, right? You probe, she's feeling this, yes, let's kind of respond. There is control, there is coordination, as opposed to, you know, with Riley, everything is sort of like, you know, elbowing to try to get to the control panel. But it's because it's in those moments, right? It's in those moments of tension that growth happens. It's in those moments when we are afraid that we learn how to manage our fear. It's in those moments that we're angry that we learn how to manage our anger. It's in those moments, right? I mean, like life is essentially this constant dress rehearsal. Like you're constantly kind of like practicing and figuring it out. You know, we learn how to manage conflict in the conflicts that we have in our lives. If you never have conflict, if you always sort of like, you never learn how to actually like communicate honestly with somebody, you're not going to know what to do when it happens. Like I've been there. You never learn how to like set boundaries, communicate effectively, like communicate kind of with kindness. You don't know what to do when it actually happens. If you're never tested by anger, you're going to blow up probably the first time that you actually feel angry, because you don't know how to deal with anger.
Right. Well, and that's kind of like, so it's interesting, right? Because watching this movie as a 9, like anger is, so in Enneagram kind of like thought, there's like a particular emotion that is like most accessible for different triads. Like 8, 9, and 1 all have access to like, you know, anger kind of is like the most accessible emotion for each of those types, right? 8, 9, 1, and they do something different with it. Shame for 2, 3, and 4, right? Like the sense of just inadequacy and like somehow not being enough. And then for 5, 6, and 7, like the kind of like that core, most accessible feeling there is fear. So you get fear, anger, and shame, which is kind of to say self-disgust, right? Like shame is really like a disgust with the self. But watching this as a 9 and seeing like anger kind of taking this like prevalent role in the movie is like, well, I don't feel that way. You know what I mean? Like, well, I don't do that. That's not, you know, like I don't feel angry like that. Which is funny because like the 8s like would externalize their anger. 1s would internalize their anger and be like, you stupid so-and-so, I can't believe you're such an idiot. Like, how could you have gotten that test, like that question wrong? You're so which I have a very bit strong one part though. I think I've told the story about leaving that final period off of your thesis last paper in grad school, my thesis paper that won a freaking award. And I'm still like, nope, it's not perfect. I'm a big stupid. Look at how stupid I am. I know it's terrible. But generally speaking, like what the 9 does is totally dissociate from anger altogether, which you can imagine would only give it more power.
Yeah.
Because then it becomes, again, it's like, okay, anger, you stay in this circle and don't touch anything. As long as you're good and you don't touch anything, like everything, the day will go fine. It'll be fine. Meanwhile, there's like a fire that's just like burning inside of like the amount of kind of like, this is the thing that sucks about being a 9 is like you don't ever deal with like the conflicts as they happen, but you still store them, right? So like you almost like swallow them into your body, and you go, it's fine, it's just fine, and then it's not.
Yeah, narrator says it wasn't fine.
Yeah, but it wasn't, and all of a sudden you're almost shocked to realize how not fine things have been. You know, when you're like, and it's over something so stupid usually of like, I told you to eat your peas. Why won't you eat your peas? Why doesn't anybody listen to me? Nobody ever does anything that I ask them to do. And you're like, this is not about the peas.
There's something deep happening here.
It is just not about the peas right now. Woo! Daddy's got to figure things out. Yeah. Daddy needs a timeout.
But that's just, again, like these aspects to ourselves, these aspects of ourselves, like just go kind of underdeveloped, right? I mean, that's the thing, like denial of an emotion is not the same thing as processing an emotion.
Right.
You know, and this is something like I learned the hard way. I mean, like being in therapy over the last couple of years now, like realizing that, you know, the way that my therapist talks about it is like, you know, if you take a beach ball and maybe those are your emotions. My instinct for a long time was just to sort of hold it underwater. But the further you push the beach ball, right, the more the water pushes back at it, until eventually you lose your grip on it and this thing shoots out of the water. So I'm very sympathetic.
God, what's happening?
Why am I feeling these things and I don't know what to do with them?
I don't even know what they are. There's just so many colors on this beach ball.
Because you go from like the illusion of control, your grip is on this thing, right? It's there, it's pressed, you've got it under control, and it goes back to equilibrium, not by sort of like gently moving to the surface with your hands still upon the emotion. It totally slips out of your grasp and it shoots 10 feet into the air. You know, the more repressed it is, the more it shoots out. And like that is the complete opposite of managing your emotions. That is the complete opposite of a civil dialogue where it's like anger. What are you perceiving right now? You know, that's the difference between the dad, right, who is ruled by anger, which is interesting.
Totally.
The dad who is ruled by anger versus like the Incredible Hulk. I mean, like the sort of the underlying thing about that character is that Bruce Banner has this anger issue and it wells up and it literally transforms him into a monster. And he disappears, right? You think back to the Avengers movies, like the Hulk has no language for the most part, right? He has nothing to do with Bruce Banner. He's just
smash.
Yeah, Hulk smash. That's it. Until Bruce Banner wakes up the following morning wearing, shredded purple pants.
Yeah,
always
but
purple
I think
pants.
This is what's kind of important to recognize here, that even though like anger is kind of at the captain's in the captain's chair for dad, like that doesn't mean he's like an angry dude.
Yes.
Right. Like, because you still see like he's got all of his emotions at the thing, right? They're all there together. They're not off, like, they dissociate together. They, which is hilarious, by the way, when he's like, you go and he's just watching a hockey game in his mind, and it's like totally true. Like maybe not watching an actual hockey game like that or replaying one, but it's just like that dissociative kind of thing of like, oh, she's talking to me. What did she just say?
Yeah.
What signals are you picking up? Okay, she's frustrated with us right now. Like, oh, how was school? Like, duh. Like, so good.
And mom plays the memory of the Brazilian swim instructor or whatever.
Yeah. Come with me, Consuela. What does he call her? I don't think he calls her Consuela, obviously. What does he call her? Something. Anyway.
Yeah.
Chiqueña. That's what he calls her. Come with me, Chiqueña.
It's really funny.
I know.
But you're right. He's not an angry person, right? I mean, personality wise, the mom is definitely more empathetic with sadness sort of sitting in the captain's chair. The dad definitely seems to have more of a sense of like justice. He's kind of more of the enforcer in the family, right? He's the one who puts the foot down. He's the one who is like starting this business. So he clearly has this like vision of a thing that he wants to do. I mean, and anger is the thing that kind of enforces those boundaries, right? Like the business is working. I'm angry. It's not working right. My daughter should behave a certain way. I'm angry. She's not behaving a certain way.
Right. And that's when it becomes problematic, right? When like, that's the driving factor. If anger could work together with sadness to be like, okay, like this is frustrating for me. What's happening with her? Yeah. Right. Like then he can like turn to say like, well, this is the information that I'm getting, sir. Like whatever, but, the like anger, and what I love about this movie too, and is that our emotions, again, there's no such thing as a bad emotion. There's no such thing as a bad part. There's none of that. They're all, at least in terms of like what they're trying to do for us, right? Like they're trying to help us. They want things to be good for us. Like Goofball Island is a good part of Riley. It would be the wrong part to use if she was sitting in school. Like that's when it becomes difficult, right? When she begins to think that she is Goofball Island, or that she is this, or she is that, but rather seeing herself as all of them. And anger in particular, right, is this emotion that is, again, like I think with these feelings, like we have to recognize like that they're God-given. Yeah. Like God gave us emotion. There's this kind of, and I don't ever really know what to think about it, but sometimes like I hear sometimes people talk about like, we don't want to be like emotional about this. This is our faith. And, it's not a, something that we want to have lots of feelings about. Like as if like having feelings about Pascha or feelings about the crucifixion or feelings about any of these other kinds of things was somehow inherently like sensationalistic, maybe. I don't know, does that make any sense?
It does. And so the trouble is, especially these kind of like these voices are actually distorting the patristic witness of the church. So like the advice that you get from the fathers about this is that I'm actually speaking of reading, I'm reading now some sermons by Elder Emilianos, and he's talking about some of the chapters of love that Maximus the Confessor writes. And he talks about prayer, and he talks about the reason why prayer is supposed to be this thing that is undisturbed for us, right? Like the goal is to sort of be free of our imagination, to be free of like passions in prayer. And if we're having difficulty praying, if our soul is not like postured towards God, that is because there's an unresolved passion in our life that we have to deal with. But it's not to say that emotions are bad. It's not to say that, like, again, Jesus felt emotions, and we see that in the scriptures.
Right.
Where emotions become problematic, if we can like frame it in that way, I'm not sure if that's the best way to put it, is like when we identify them, we identify with them, right? Like this sense of peace within us is like identified with the presence of God, right? It's kind of like emotions which could very well be created by us that we're sort of confusing with the presence of God himself, as opposed to potentially, again, things that we are creating that could be steering us astray. Like that's where there is caution about your emotions, your imaginations, right? Like in a particular context. It's not to say that imagination is always bad. It's not to say that like emotions are always to be like, always need to be sober. Like there's no room for laughter, right? There's no room for whatever. Like that's nonsense. And it's a misrepresentation of the kind of like this prayer specific advice that is given. And that's the sort of stuff that also, like, again, is like a pet peeve of mine, because you see these comments online in particular, people who think they're like defending the faith, but it's like, no, you're actually misrepresenting the faith by saying that.
You're actually offending the faith.
Yeah.
Zing.
You know, there's nothing wrong with emotions. Like, again, like Jesus feels emotions himself. The Son of God who took on flesh and became incarnate, like clearly felt emotions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like did Jesus need to repent of his anger and disgust in the temple? Did Jesus need to repent of his sadness at the tomb of Lazarus? Did Jesus need to like repent of the joy that I'm sure he felt at the wedding in Cana? No, like that's just part of what it is to be a human. But his emotions were managed. His emotions were part of a greater sort of system of health. And honestly, this is the reason why we've been talking about this the last couple of weeks, both on pop culture and in Be the Bee and in other stuff. Because like, if nothing else, one of the consequences of the COVID pandemic is like people are feeling a lot of feelings. And it's manifesting itself when it's dysregulated. It's manifesting as anger and lashing out. It's manifesting itself as like unrestrained sadness. It's manifesting itself as these things that are like being misdirected contra other people.
Yes.
And that's why I think this has been such a big thing for us over the course of the last month. Like, we need to talk about emotions, and like that's part of our, like we said in the last Be the Bee, like if something within you is changing the way you interact with others, you know, that's a problem. If the emotion you're feeling is causing you to lash out in anonymous internet comments and insult people and whatever, like that's a problem. If it's causing you to call your bishop a heretic and like lash out as if you're the sort of source of orthodoxy, like that's a problem. If it's causing you to take it out on your family and friends, like that's a problem. And that's why we've been so, I think, preoccupied with emotions. And that's why I think like Inside Out is a perfect movie for us to cover now, because it hits this on the nose.
Yeah. So just as we're talking about feelings too, there, I don't know if I can recommend this book, but I also don't know that I can't recommend it. But I found it really helpful a few years ago, and I haven't read it in a long time, so take it with a grain of salt. But there's a book called Renovation of the Heart by a guy named Dallas Willard. And Dallas Willard was an evangelical guy who was a philosophy professor at USC until he died several years ago. But he was really, really, and I really have liked the stuff of his that I've read, because he's really concerned with like spiritual formation and transformation and like the renewing of the human person and all this kind of stuff. And Renovation of the Heart, he talks about how all the parts of the human being need to be transformed, right? So like our minds, our hearts, our social sphere, like all of this kind of stuff. And he also talks about the feelings. and I just love like the way that he begins to say this, right? He says feelings are a primary blessing and a primary problem for human life.
Uh-huh.
In the restoration of the individual to God, feelings too must be renovated, old ones removed in many cases, or at least thoroughly modified, and new ones installed or at least heightened into new prominence. Feelings live in the front row of our lives like unruly children clamoring for attention. You know, and like I think at one point in this book, I'm trying to remember exactly where he says it. He says essentially that like feelings make really great servants, but terrible masters.
Sure.
And like that, I wish that I could find exactly where he says that, because he says some really good stuff about it around there. And that to me is like, I think a really important thing here, and maybe to like what you're speaking about, that like a lot of times what we end up doing is trying to serve an emotion, right? Like, how do I have more of this thing so that I have more joy? Or like, I feel so sad right now, so that is kind of the ultimate take on my reality. And there almost becomes this like, again, this addiction to like feelings that like I think some of us can get into.
Yeah. We talked about
really
that in the Fiona podcast, the Fiona Apple podcast last week. Yeah.
But even like, I think that's where like substances can even come in handy, right? Like for those of us who maybe feel like really stressed out, like you can see why something like alcohol or marijuana or overeating would feel good.
Sure.
It slows you down. It just calms you down a little bit, right? Or for those of us who like who get antsy when we feel stuck at home, like you can see why like addiction to shopping would be like really enjoyable, because it like gets you out there, right? But all this is to like create some feeling in us where maybe there isn't any. And I don't know, I guess it makes me wonder, like what does the human person whose feelings have been transformed, whose feelings have been kind of gathered together in Christ, I don't know that I know what that necessarily looks like.
There is, there is I have like a very vague recollection. I'll have to like look. I'm probably not going to remember it right now. There is some sort of patristic sermon or something that talks about this. And I can't remember if it's like Chrysostom or Gregory the Great. But there's a sermon that talks about this. I feel like I have to ask Father Panayotti when we get off of this, because he'll probably remember. I think we read this back in seminary, where it talks about like, you know, the virtuous person is going to feel anger, but is going to be like angry at the presence of unrighteousness and injustice.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, again, is like what Jesus feels. Like he sees the way that the temple, the house of his father, is being turned into a den of thieves, and he's angry about that.
Yeah, he's not happy.
Yeah. You know, if you are a virtuous person who is going to feel sadness at the presence of death, at the presence of sin, at the presence of sickness, right? At the presence of pain in the lives of other people, like that is a totally appropriate thing to be sad about.
Yes.
Because if nothing else, that alerts you to the reality of this thing in somebody else, and causes, you know, like you all the times when Jesus is, like we read this actually the last Sunday, I think it was, right? The Sunday of the blind man, where there's the blind man that Jesus puts the mud into his eyes and he sends to the pool of Siloam to wash. Like that man doesn't call Jesus. Jesus goes to him, and then Jesus finds him at the end of the reading again, like proactively. It's like, it's very reasonable to assume it's not in the text, right? But his disciples are there saying like, Master, who sinned? When you would imagine like Jesus actually sees this man and just has compassion on him and feels sad that he's never seen the sunrise.
Yeah.
You know, and this sadness is the thing that brings him to this man.
Yeah.
Reading into the text a little bit, but I think it's a reasonable eisegesis in that case. You know, like that's a natural thing to be sad about.
Yeah. I mean, even the hymns of the church like move you that way. Like, you know, hearing them at Vespers last week, of like, he's like, basically it's like written from the perspective of the blind man. He's like, I've never seen day. I go around all day asking, is it day? Is it night? Because I don't know. And it's like,
yeah,
what a disorienting life that would be. You know, I mean, even here now, I'm like, what day of the week is it?
Yeah.
October? Like, I don't even know, like, you know, like, like where we are in like the lunar progression. I don't have any idea what's going on right now, or I don't know, man.
Because we don't have the rhythm of like the stuff in our lives, right? Which is super disorienting.
Yep.
So yeah, like that's a reasonable thing to be sad about. I mean, I think even in terms of the way the church talks about our sins, we talk about mourning over our sins, right? Weeping over our sins. Like a virtuous, well-adjusted person is going to weep over his or her sins. That's sadness, an appropriate sadness.
But at the same time too, I think part of it becomes like, because I think about like what my spiritual father once said, that he had, he once confessed like, and I don't feel bad about it. Like, right. Like I did the sin and like I don't feel bad. So he confessed like not feeling bad.
Yeah.
And his spiritual father was like, who do you think you are? That like you would feel bad about sinning. And like that I thought was such an interesting response to that, right? Like, of course you don't. Like your heart is darkened. Like you don't feel the pain of it that like Saint Silouan feels when the grace of God withdraws from him for like 18 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, he gets a taste of it. He sees Christ, then Christ withdraws, and he's just like weeps every day.
Yeah.
Over like not feeling that closeness of God. And I think that what I take from that is kind of twofold, right? Like there, on the one hand, there is the like, well, the human person transformed would feel such slight movements of the spirit toward or away his soul that it would cause him great joy or great grief, right? To somehow be like losing that grace or like feeling some of it like draining from you. I mean, because Christ, the Holy Spirit is everywhere present, filling all things, right? So there's not like, he's not there. Like that doesn't make sense. But there's this like, tangible experience of his movement toward us versus this kind of like holding back of grace, but it's not like he's gone or whatever, because that would be confusing. But the idea, I think, of not being there and having such a sensitive soul makes sense to me, right? Like that's kind of one part of it. But then the other part of it is like, like you can't base everything that happens in your life on the presence or the absence of an emotion. Like you read the Bible, sometimes it feels really interesting and really good, and sometimes it feels boring as all get out.
Yeah.
Sometimes you really are like, wow, that was a really, good prayer time that I had. It flew by. Other times it's like, oh my gosh, have I only been standing here for 2 minutes? Like this has felt like an eternity. And I don't know, like I think that there's just something to like recognizing that like feelings come and go, like the average feeling lasts 90 seconds. Did you know that?
Interesting.
Before it changes into some other feeling.
Yeah. It makes sense. Even 90 seconds feels like a long time for me. I feel like I bounce around a lot faster.
Yeah, especially between like anger and disgust.
Yeah. And hunger.
Yeah. Usually I find that how hungry I am is dependent on how angry and disgusted I am. Ugh, I gotta eat something.
That's a really good point. And so it's interesting. In terms even of the weeping of the sins, you'll see there's patristic literature, like some of the folks in some of the intro texts for the Philokalia, for instance, they'll say that there's a difference between sort of an emotional weeping for your sins and actually this kind of like inner movement of the spirit, which is almost like washing you, like kind of baptizing you from within. It's not an emotional weeping. It's just kind of this, the Holy Spirit has taken over you kind of thing. So that's even the thing too. Like when we see something that kind of manifests potentially as an emotion, it's not necessarily an emotion. It's kind of like this inner motion. And like you said, that somebody who's actually drawing closer to Christ on a daily basis, like the caliper of their heart is more refined. It's like the difference between a yardstick that can measure yards and like one of those little micrometers that can measure millimeters and even something more accurate than that, or more fine than that. And as we progress in the spiritual life, God willing, like we go from yardsticks to like something that can actually kind of like tell these small things. But it's beyond emotions. And you're right. I mean, like emotions don't always land. And that again, like that's also why that's where some of that counsel comes when it comes to emotions, right? Like emotions don't tell the whole story. And sometimes emotions are just kind of like self-generated. Like you have, your prayer is not necessarily less valuable because you haven't felt anything. Like you still put yourself in the presence of God, even if you lack the discernment to perceive it.
Right.
You know, and like, don't be down on yourself, and don't congratulate yourself just because you felt something. Like maybe it was just a little bit of serotonin that happened to leak into your brain right now. Doesn't mean you're holy. It just means you felt something.
Mm-hmm. I felt the thing. I felt it.
Somebody opened the window. A draft.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that like this movie in particular it presents such a fascinating insight into the different ways that we are, right? Like, and I think even in some ways, like what you kind of spoke to about like people and like their criticisms online of like, you know, what we do and our work and all of that kind of stuff. Like the train of thought in this movie is so interesting. I love when they're like, it's all over the place. Like,
oh yeah,
like it. I was like, yep, that's it. And when, by the way, which is really interesting, when she finally goes offline and kind of like decides to run away and everything numbs out, and she's just in kind of like survival mode, the train stops, right? Which is actually really neurologically accurate, because when we kind of go into that state of like, you know, like being catatonic or kind of where fear, anger, and disgust are kind of running the show, we're in what is like a survival response, a threat. We're in fight or flight, right? And so when we're in fight or flight, which is literally what she's doing, she's kind of like fighting for herself by running away.
Yeah.
Right. Fleeing.
Because that's what the anger keeps saying, right? There's no memories here. We're going to go find ourselves and create ourselves again back home in Minneapolis or Minnesota.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because now San Francisco has become this like location of threat, right? Like everything is, and it is like she's losing herself here. So it becomes threat, and she goes offline. And when that happens neurologically, our prefrontal cortex and like that kind of higher part of the brain, like what's called basically what we think of like as the human brain, like the thing that makes us different from animals, it goes completely offline. You know, we're not capable of thinking rationally. We're not capable of kind of like stringing together complex thoughts, which is why, you know, sometimes when you get really upset or scared or whatever, like you don't have like a sentence to say about it. Usually you're like, because like you're in a part of your brain that is nonverbal. Like there are no words there. You don't have access to the words. Sometimes what can happen, of course, is like when we get in fights, we can find words and use them as daggers, right? Like, but we're responding still out of that kind of like limbic system, which is again that part, that smaller part of our brain where fear, disgust, and anger run the show to keep us safe, just to keep us. That's the whole part of the limbic system, is like, don't die.
Yeah,
like that is literally what your limbic system is there for, is to keep you from dying. It's always scanning for threats. It's always ready to kind of like send up the alarm bells.
Yeah,
it's always ready to like.
And it's a survival instinct if it can move, right, and get you to act without thinking, because you're just faster. Like if you see a bush, you know, like it's a saber-toothed tiger in the bush. Like you don't want to stop to think about it. You want to run and climb a tree.
I wonder how old that tiger is. What are its teeth made out of? Like there's no access to that whatsoever. And thank God. Like there would actually be something wrong with you if you were like, that thing's running at me quite quickly. I wonder if it's 60 miles an hour or maybe 62 miles an hour. Either way.
Is that a free range? Is that a free range saber-tooth tiger? Did it have a name?
Can you take me to the farm where it was raised?
Thank you for picking up that Portlandia reference.
So good. But yeah, I think the interesting thing here with ideas and thoughts, right, is like when the thoughts go offline, it's just, you're just in survival mode. But there's also, I think, that dynamic that we talked about a little bit too, where like anger implants this idea in her head, kind of comes up with the idea, which again, he thinks is going to help her. Yeah. That's why he gives it to her. It's obviously not a good idea.
But he loves Riley.
And that's an important thing, I think, to recognize, is like, that doesn't mean we can't be angry. It's like, we got to learn how to befriend our anger and learn what are you for, dude? right? Like, okay, you care about justice and rightness and moving, and you're the drive. Like, you're the thing that drives me towards things, right? It helps me get what I want, helps me get what I think is good. Okay, that's what you're for. Now I can listen to you. But like, our thoughts, you know, like it made me think a little bit of how that whole thing played out. I think it was St. Paisios who talked about thoughts as airplanes, and like
Yes.
our mind and our hearts kind of is like the runway, right? And we can decide to let them. By the way, I don't know if you've been hearing throughout this whole recording, but there's been a lot of feelings going on in the background.
A little bit,
Like,
yeah.
variations of sadness and anger. So that's great. It's pretty funny.
It's a good backdrop for this conversation.
It is, indeed it is, indeed it is. But there is this sense where like the thoughts can come to us, and they're not necessarily like, again, bad thoughts. They become destructive when we accept them. When like running away is not a bad thought, right? It's a creative solution to a difficult problem.
This is unsafe. I need to leave the unsafe place.
Yes, that's a good idea. Also, it's a terrible idea, right? Right? But I mean, it's a really creative solution. And there's sometimes, by the way, like I see that with like my kids, where I see them doing like things that are kind of awesome and also like terribly dangerous.
Yeah.
Like jumping on from thing to thing. I'm like, that's awesome. That's a really great way to have fun. And you will kill yourself if you keep doing that. They're like, but I haven't killed myself yet. Like, give it time.
Yeah.
And I'd like you around. So please don't jump on that anymore. What?
Correlation is not causation. Just because you have not killed yourself yet does not mean that you won't.
Right. But I love that moment too, where Joy knocks over the facts and opinions. And she's like, "Oh, these facts and opinions look so similar." I'm like, that happens all the time. I get mixed up all the time.
Yeah.
So good.
No, but it's true, right? Because like, and that's where, so this is kind of the unstated part of the movie, but it's clearly there. Like there is some sort of higher rational faculty that is at play in Riley. When anger puts the idea into the console, like Riley still exists. Riley has to accept it or not. Like even like when they, when they first moved to San Francisco and Joy is like, "Hey, remember that pizzeria that you passed by?" Right? Like Riley doesn't repeat Joy's words. Riley sort of like receives the prompt and chooses to act upon it. So like there is this sort of Riley. I mean, it's very, in terms of like the family systems, the interfamily systems, for me, it's very similar to kind of like Plato's tripartite soul sort of thing. Like it's a very kind of classic philosophical idea that there's your intellectual, your appetitive, and your, what is it? Like your emotional, I forget the three now off the top of my head. And it's like a chariot, right? And the point is you need a competent driver driving the chariot. Like you need strong horses, right? You need that sort of like appetitive, the anger, the desire. Like you need that to drive the chariot forward, and you need a driver.
It's Ron, Harry, and Hermione.
Like you need somebody to be like, this is an unsafe situation. I need to flee. And then you think about it and you're like, well, maybe if I have a conversation with my parents, I can explain to them what I'm feeling and we can come up with a solution. As opposed to let me buy it, like steal my mom's credit card and like buy a bus ticket.
Right. But that's what you get to see, right? That like the reason that's impossible is because she's not allowed to be sad. Right. Like, and that's where it becomes not just an internal system, but like a family system is at play here.
Sure.
Right. Like the parents have sinned against Riley. Like that also needs to be accepted in all of this, that Riley's not some like bad girl. She's only doing what she's been told to do, essentially. Yeah. Right. Like don't feel sad or don't whatever. But again, you can't selectively numb things. So if you can't feel sad, then you also can't keep being the happy girl.
Yes.
Right.
So this goes to like, again, the point that we made in the latest Be the Bee episode about like mental, emotional, spiritual, physical health, how they're all tied together. Like it's a great point. You see her mental health, like her brain shuts off when her emotional health isn't there.
Yes. And then she does something that physically endangers herself.
Yeah.
Right. Like it all just, bad news.
Super bad news.
Yeah. But I think that's where it becomes essential, right? That we begin to recognize, like in all of our relationships, that like there are no bad parts, right? Like the parts, maybe they get extreme from time to time, but the parts themselves are not bad. And there's some way I think that we need to find ways to like, reach toward one another to I don't know, like welcome all of one another's parts into the table, because that's the only way that anything can be done with them, right? Like, what are you after? Part of me that falls asleep while I'm trying to write a paper, like, oh, you're trying to keep me from feeling stressed out. That's really, really nice of you.
Yeah.
And maybe we can find some other ways to keep me from feeling stressed out right now. Maybe I can go on a walk. Like, maybe that'll help me and I can come back and do this thing. But you just shutting down my brain is not helping me get what I need to do. Which, by the way, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but sometimes when I have something like really important that I need to do, have I ever told you this?
No.
Like sometimes when I feel like I have something really, really important, or that I really care about,
mm-hmm.
I'll sit down to like take care of something, and I'll immediately start feeling dizzy.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Almost like I've had too much to drink.
Wow. And that's part of that, like removing yourself from this thing that is very high stakes. Is that what you think it is?
Totally. I think it's totally like my some part of my psyche is like, okay, I'm going to protect you here and keep you safe from this, because this, like, you're probably going to screw this up, and if you screw this up, people are going to be mad. So like, let's fall asleep a little bit.
Yeah. We talk about that during B2B retreats, such as they were, when we do the silence workshop, like, because some kids will fall asleep when we sit there in silence for 15 minutes. And I'll tell them, like, you're probably not tired right now. It's first thing in the morning. You had some sugar, you had whatever, like, you're falling asleep because you're sort of avoiding something, and it's like, yeah, it's like the avoidant is a very nine kind of thing, right? Like a very nine sort of. We're number one. Nines are number one.
Nines are number 9. Nines come last. Nines come last. Everybody else go first. Nobody notice me. Someone please notice me. I don't want to be alone.
But I think it's like that instinct to run, I think, is very common. Like, especially if you're younger, you haven't figured out how to deal with your emotions. I mean, like, I think, like, again, like, we having done these sorts of sessions with teens like all over the country for years and years and years now, like, how many people will have a bad day at school and their instinct is to go home and take a nap? Like, it's what we do. It's like some level of avoidance.
But there's also, I think there's also some part of it too, actually, because you see this happen for Riley when she goes to sleep. That also helps her process her feelings.
True.
Right? Like that, because that's what happens in sleep. That's why, REM, rapid eye movement, kind of helps just like store things away and make them less overwhelming. Because if we remembered every bad thing that happened to us throughout the day, we would be dead.
Oh yeah.
Like thank God, something like things just are boop. They move on. But that's when trauma becomes trauma too, is when like those bad things that happen can't quite get filed away into the past, right? They keep being relived as this present.
They're not memories, they're realities.
Right. I mean, they're not realities, they're re-experienced, right?
Yeah.
Which is they feel real, but they're not real.
Well,
right? The reality is you're safe. Like you're in this room, you're whatever, like that guy's just wearing a red shirt. Right? Like that is the reality, and the brain recognizes it as a threat, right? And so then all of a sudden we're reliving. Everything okay over there?
I heard a noise.
Which is what EMDR, this kind of mode of therapy that focuses on eye movement, right? The whole reason for that is to get that stimulation that happens in sleep going, so that you can begin to reprocess that memory and get it finally stored into your long-term memory. So that it no longer feels like it's alive in the moment, which is really fascinating, to be able to capitalize on just like this God-given thing of sleep as a way to heal our brain. Do that while you're awake. It just because it uses the same mechanism. It's crazy.
Hacking your brain.
Brainhacks.com. I don't know what that is. Now I want to go to brainhacks.com and see what's there. Every time I say a website that I've never been to, I always get a little scared.
Why?
Just because it's like, what if that's not what I want it to be?
Brain hacks. They literally hack at brains.
Yeah, or whatever. Who knows? Right? Washed up therapists.
It's really clean therapists that have just showered.
Yeah. Brain hacks. I don't get that one.
Anyway, we're a little over time. I feel like we didn't get to everything in the outline, but like we got deep into some stuff. Any kind of like last things that you want to highlight before we pack up here?
I don't think so. I mean, I just like this movie. I'm sorry I talked so much. Like I always do this. I just get like I figure out what I'm trying to say as I say it. So I apologize to anyone who has to deal.
That's why we do this. That's why we do this. I mean, like this has happened to each of us multiple times. Like our appreciation, like if we're not kind of sure about what we thought about a movie or something, like it kind of clarifies as we think about it. And no, I feel like you're somebody whose opinion I value, and you're somebody who I learn a lot from on a daily basis. And so like I learn a lot from you processing your things out loud and asking good questions and listening to my rambling nonsense. So like, no, don't apologize for that. You're good.
Thanks, man. Thanks for accepting all my parts.
Yeah.
Even my party part. Especially my party part.
Bing bong.
Bing bong, bing bong. Who's a friend who makes you think? Who likes to play? I don't know how it goes. Something. Bing bong, bing bong.
I don't know.
Well,
what are we doing next week? Homework.
Oh, man, we figured this all out.
Are we doing Maleficent next week? No.
Maleficent. No, Bonfire of Destiny.
Okay, where is that?
That is on the Netflix.
Okay, Bonfire of Destiny. It's a series.
It is, and there are moments of kind of grotesque, just a spoiler alert a little bit here. It takes place in a fire in 1897 in Paris. And there are some who survive and many who do not. And some of those who survive are burnt horribly.
Okay.
And you kind of have to deal with that. And there are moments where like the survivor who's burnt horribly, like kind of like looks at herself nude in the mirror and stuff. So like if there's moments, by and large, it's totally doable, but there might be some of those moments that aren't for the faint of heart.
Okay.
But my wife and I watched it last week, and it was definitely interesting, man. It was definitely an interesting show. So it'll be fun to kind of do something like that, because you've never done something like that before, you and I. This is something probably like that the girls would have done. But it'll be fun for us to do it, I think.
I'm excited. That'll be the not penultimate episode, but we're going to do that. Then we're going to do Maleficent, and then we're going to do The Chosen, and then that's going to be up until the summer, right?
Yep. Jawohl, man.
That's right. Okay, do your homework. I got to do my homework for next week. Christian, I enjoy hearing you speak.
And I enjoy speaking.
Okay, well, on this leave taking, Christ is risen.
Truly, he is risen.
We'll talk next week, man. Bye, everybody.